Hey guys, welcome back to the Fanfic Reread Project. In this episode, we are going to begin our reread of the first batch of Keep Breathing's drafts. So, Keep Breathing is a fic that I've written that is based off of the first 4 Phase 1 films from the MCU. In this episode, we'll be covering everything I'm pretty sure I wrote in 2013. The only thing I am not sure of is what we will be reading very last, which is a draft of part 2, which is based off of the Hulk, but I don't even know if we're going to get to that in this episode. So enough preamble, let's get into this. So this document is not 100% in order. The stories are arranged roughly chronologically, but they're also in the order that they would have been presented if they had actually been in Keep Breathing. So we start with the first draft of Captain America. However, I did not write this first. I actually wrote Thor first, which I distinctly remember. But either way, we're gonna do it the way that it's ordered in here. So let's get to it. I could do this all day. He wheezed as the other guy towered over him, not a scratch on his reddened face. His eyes widened in what was probably half surprise and half exasperation. "You don't know when to quit, do you, punk?" he spat as he pulled his fist back again. There was blood dripping into Steve's eye, but he smiled anyway. "I already told you." But before he could even get out the rest of it, someone grabbed the guy's arm, and the next thing either of them knew, he was falling to the ground. It's a mouthful. Bucky stood where he'd been, smoothing the non-existent wrinkles from his brand new uniform. So right off the back, I want to say that this kind of sounds like the Dark Knight trilogy. The prose really reminds me of, I don't want to say a polished version of that, but kind of. Which is weird, because I edited the Dark Knight Rises, at least, in 2014. Technically, I also edited Batman Begins in 2014, but I didn't change a lot of the prose that was already there, so it doesn't sound like it. But this is definitely from 2013. I don't remember how late in the year, though, because I think I wrote Thor during the summer-ish, which is later than the original version of The Dark Knight Rises, but still before Harry Potter. And I think the second significant rewrite of The Hunger Games. So I guess we can compare and contrast to that stuff when we get down to it. But yeah, this definitely feels like Dark Knight Rises prose to me, oddly enough. "What was that? I was just getting my second win," says Steve. Bucky gave him his hand, and Steve pulled himself off the ground. "You got something against running away?" he asked as he wiped the blood from Steve's temple. He shrugged. "Pronoun game. We are on the first page." "You start running, they'll never let you stop, baby." "It's true." He put his hands on his hips and let out a sigh like a disgruntled father, but then he smiled. "Sorry. I just don't get you sometimes." He laughed out, and then he pecked him on the cheek. "Cut that out," Steve said, waving him away and looking warily toward the street. No one paid them any mind. "Come on, you." Bucky took him by the arm and pulled him toward the road. It's weird that Steve glances out to the street to make sure no one's watching. In isolation, totally fine. It makes sense. It's the 1940s. Who knows what would have happened? There is a man on the ground. Don't you think you should be a little bit more worried about him? The guy who's literally laying right next to you. Is he that out cold? Did Bucky murder him? Jesus. But anyway, "I see you were luckier than I was," Steve started, nodding towards his uniform. "I was hoping you'd want to celebrate tonight." Steve raised an eyebrow. "How exactly?" I don't think that's innuendo, but it feels like it. "The world's fair," Bucky said with a shrug, but Steve caught the way he was avoiding his gaze. "That's not all, is it?" "Maybe." "Maybe?" He lowered his voice. "Oh, God. We never go dancing, baby." "You go all the time," Steve reminded him. "Not with you." Now it was Steve's turn to sigh. "I don't even know how to dance. I'll teach you." But Steve wasn't sure. "If it makes you feel better, we'll have dates." "Really?" Steve said with a chuckle. "What did you tell her about me?" "That you're a great guy. You'll like her." Steve laughed again. "Come on, honey. I don't know when we'll get the chance to again." "Don't talk like..." "Okay." Bucky's eyes lit up as soon as he heard the answer. "I'll go." That's the end of that. That's it. So that was something. It's weird because I feel like the first time I read that, I fucking hated it. Like, I really didn't. Like, not the first time, but the first time I read it in something like this, I was like, this sucks. But reading it just now, I got through it just fine. It's perfectly readable to me. There's not much to it, though. I will say that it is, I don't want to call it dry, because dry implies that it's hard to read in a way because of the lack of detail or how boring it is, but it's not boring. It's actually really fucking funny. But it's very bare. That's a better word for it. There's not a lot going on. We have no sense of where Steve and Bucky are outside of the bare essentials of they're in an alley, now they're on the street. That's literally it. And I feel like because this takes place in New York City, in a city that has that much character, you kind of gotta like talk about it, you know what I mean? So yeah, like in general, it's fine. It's passable, but it needs more. So let's move on to, I guess this is chapter 2? Not entirely sure, but sure. That's them right there, Bucky said, pointing to two girls standing underneath a huge statue. The one girl was pretty and black-haired and a good 5 inches taller than him, just as he expected. But the other was a surprise. She was small, about the same height as he was in her shoes, with big brown eyes the same shade as her hair. You never said she was little, Steve whispered. I said you would like her, Bucky whispered back. Steve smiled. That was a nice change of pace. Hey guys, Editing Frankie here. So I just wanted to pop in because the original portion that I recorded talking about this was just a hot mess. But I wanted to say, and what I was originally trying to say here, is that there are a lot of similarities between not only this take on Captain America in Coven, but the later draft of it, and the Earth 1 version of Captain America, which is still published, like, and up on my website. We will be reading it during this reread, but that won't be happening until the 2014 batch of stuff. But if you wanted to, on your own, go through and read that stuff, I can link to it in the description. See, I told you, he heard the little one say as they walked up. He also saw her elbow her friend in the side lightly. Cut it out, Cookie, her friend said back, shooting her a look. Hi, James. Steve, this is Susan. The tall girl smiled at him politely. And this is Cordelia. Susie, Cookie, Steve. Cordelia bounced up to him and took him by the arm. So, where do we start? The World's Fair was huge, and everything was made of curving lines and polished silver and blue-white lights. Steve felt kind of weird having Cordelia on his arm, but at the same time, it was nice, because they usually clung to Bucky and pretended he didn't exist. Cordelia, on the other hand, pulled him everywhere, and had him ducking under people to get through to the front of the crowds. Do you think it really works? Steve asked absently, looking up at what looked like a statue in a red suit. Cordelia hummed through a mouthful of soda. Really? She nodded. But you see how he's in the glass case, she said, tapping at what little of it she could reach above the high pedestal. When he touches the air, Okay, why did it change pronouns in the middle there? But, when it touches the air, it bursts into flames. Steve's eyes widened. What? He was supposed to be solar-powered. How do you know that? I've seen it, she said with a nonchalant shrug. But how... Hey, Steve! He turned around and saw Bucky waving to him from the back. Come look at this! Cordelia grabbed him by the hand and pulled him away before he could finish his thought. Yeah, I am just struck by how similar this is to what is currently in Captain America. I guess just for clarification, the Earth 1 fic is always referred to as Captain America. The Captain America portion of Keep Breathing is usually referred to as Part 1, and that's it. Hey, Editing Frankie again. So at this point, I just kind of remarked on the similarities between this and the Earth 1 version of Captain America, but a lot of the similarities that I noted are things that show up in the movie, so it makes sense that there would be some similar sequences. Like, the bit where Steve and Bucky come and meet the girls by, like, this big statue, that's in the movie, I'm pretty sure, or something similar. So, the idea that, like, wow, it's so striking, the similarities, a lot of this stuff was just stuff that happened in the source material, so it showed up in both. Maybe the specific way I wrote it in one being the same is kind of notable. But outside of that, it's just like because they're both based on Captain America. The other thing, and I wanted to correct something that I said here, was that this quote-unquote isn't an instance of cannibalism because I did it on purpose. While the similarities between the shit here with Cookie and the stuff in Earth 1 Captain America with Lucy, is similar on purpose because Lucy as a character, or Lucy, the way that she is portrayed now, is taken very heavily from the version of Cookie that exists in the draft of this later on. Everything else that's in here was not put in that story on purpose. It's all there because it hits the same beats. It's cannibalism. I don't know why I thought this didn't count just because Cookie is there, but moving on. There was a stage across the way with a hell of a little red coupe on it and 4 girls dancing in sparkly costumes and top hats. That turn of phrase, a hell of a that felt like I was back in The Dark Knight Rises. I feel like I just got punched in the face. Ladies and gentlemen, the red-haired girl on the end said with a wave of the hand, Mr. Howard Stark. He was a suave guy in a pressed black suit with a wide smile full of shining white teeth. Thanks, Sandy, he said, kissing her on the cheek. She blushed profusely. Ladies, gentlemen, he said to the yelling crowd. Ladies. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought I could get through that line, but I can't. Ladies, he repeated, and even Cordelia smiled. I have a vision of the future, one where everything is cleaner, faster, and easier. Ladies, can you help me out here? He said behind him, and the dancers started to remove the wheels from the car, revealing what looked like 4 motors beneath them. Steve raised an eyebrow. What's he up to? It's gonna fly, Cordelia whispered in his ear. Is it really gonna fly? He ventured. She closed her eyes for a moment and then said, a little. He didn't really know what to think of that. So, if you didn't catch the hints, the very obvious hints, Cordelia is psychic. I don't know how you could have because the hints were like the size of softballs and I was just like, phew. What usually bothers me about this part is that Cordelia, not only is she psychic, but she's very open about it, which doesn't seem like it would be a smart thing to do. Like, I highly doubt anyone's gonna run up and like burn her as a witch, but that's still kind of dangerous to reveal because you don't know how people are going to react to that. I guess, like, just pin this. And when we get, and this is like a big pin, because when we get to the second version, check out how Pepper acts around Tony, who is literally her boyfriend, I think, or just like her boss and a close friend, when we read the original version of part 3 in the next batch of Keep Breathing drafts. The differences are, no pun intended, very stark. But moving on. Folks, in a few years, cars won't even have wheels. There was a soft rumbling noise, and then blue light appeared from behind the motors, and the thing started to rise from the ground. There was a round of applause as the car hovered about a foot off the ground, but the motor sputtered out very abruptly, and the car came crashing back onto the stage. Everyone shrunk back as sparks flew. Steve glanced at Cordelia out of the corner of his eye, and she was smiling. Howard grinned despite this. I said a few years, didn't I? Everyone laughed along with him, including me, apparently. It was amusing, but something else had caught his eye, so quietly, Steve started to break away from them, until he remembered that Cordelia still had his hand. Where are you going? She asked. I was just... He started, but then he let out a sigh. It was useless to lie to her. Maybe. You wouldn't mind coming with me, would you? She shook her head. Wow, the fact that he figures that out so quickly. Interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to look real quick. And literally the part where Steve starts to leave but realizes he's still holding his date's hand, that is literally also in Captain America. Good God, I didn't realize how I copied like minute details too. It was a lot quieter in the recruitment building, and the lights were soft and yellow instead of that austere blue. There was a big poster on the wall of soldiers saluting, the words "Enlist Now" blazing across them in big capitals, but the one in the middle had his face moving. His face moving? Okay. But the one in the middle had his face removed, I think that's supposed to say. When the other guy staring at it stepped up in front of it, his face filled in the blank spot. When Steve tried the same, only the top part of his face showed. He wasn't tall enough. No. You know, you don't have to go overseas, Cordelia said, scratching at her ankle with her other foot. You sound like Bucky, Steve chuckled. I know, she sighed out, but it's true. He crossed his arms. Why do you say that? And then he followed with, is something gonna happen to me if they accept me? Yeah. Wait, something bad? Wait, I would actually get accepted? She nodded. But it's gonna change you. Of course, it's a war. That's not what I mean. He was quiet for a moment. How could she know what was going to happen to him, even if she'd been right about Stark's flying car? But if she was right, he was finally going to get accepted. It wouldn't hurt to try again, even if she was just saying it to make him feel better. Would it be bad? He asked her. She looked down and then she said, "Not really. What is it?" "I don't know exactly, but you're going to get taller." "Is that why you don't want me to sign up?" She laughed in response. "And what happens if I don't sign up again?" "Well, you're not going to not sign up now. I don't see anything." "How are you going to fake your way in this time, Steve?" They both turned around to see Bucky leaning on the door frame. Cordelia looked between the two of them and then headed for the door. "Good luck, Captain Rogers," she said back to him as she skipped into the hall. Let me pause right there. I think it's just an interesting detail that when Cordelia is like looking into the future, which I don't know if she gets flashes or something, it's not really clear how exactly her powers work, except that she can do it voluntarily. But I think it's interesting that the moment that she tells Steve that he would get accepted, the possible like future, I guess, where he doesn't sign up just disappears. It's just a cool detail, I think. "Captain Rogers?" Bucky repeated, looking after her. "I don't know," Steve shrugged. "I like the sound of that." "So you really are going to try again?" Steve nodded, and Bucky sighed. "Baby, Bucky." "Steve, you don't have to go overseas to help us win the war. I already had this conversation with Cordelia." "And what did she say?" "I have a good chance." He chuckled, but it wasn't happy. "I should be going with you." "This isn't a back alley, Steve. This is war." "I know. There are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them." He sighed. "Look, I know you don't think I can do this." "It's not that I don't think you can do this," Bucky said. "Then what is it?" "I'm scared. There, I said it." Steve shook his head in disbelief. "Bucky, it's true." He looked over his shoulder and then ran his thumb across Steve's cheek. Oh God, it's so cute. "I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you, but I do know that there's nothing I can do to talk you out of it," he said with a sad smile. "I'll be fine. Next time you see me, I'll be a captain." "Of course. Good luck, Captain," he said playfully. He glanced over his shoulder again and then he kissed Steve right on the lips. "I guess I'll see you in Europe, baby." "Yeah, I'll see you." Bucky pecked him on the forehead and then went for the door. And that's the end of that chapter. Okay, so this chapter gave me a little bit more. It had more meat, but it still doesn't feel like enough. I think with this one, though, the problem is that when I read this, not only can I not stop thinking about Captain America, the script fic from Earth 1, but also the later version of part 1 from the first published version of Keep Breathing. We're just going to refer to that as Coven Phase 1 because that's technically what it was called when it was released. Keep Breathing came later. Both versions of those have a lot more going on, and there is a lot more, especially to the Coven Phase 1 version, there's a lot more pathos to these scenes of Bucky, like, not wanting Steve to go because he's scared. I don't want to get into it because we're going to talk about it when we get to that in the batch of 2014 stories, but boy. Same thing, Captain America just has more going on with it in general. Again, in that story, Steve and Bucky are platonic friends, so the relationship stuff is removed, so it's not like you're scared. It's a completely different conversation that's closer to what happens in the movie. Yeah, so that chapter wasn't terrible. Again, this was very readable. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me or with the story like the first time I read it, but I'm getting through this very easily. I don't think I've come across a typo yet, so that right there puts it above some of the stuff from the Dark Knight trilogy for me. Also, just before we go on, I did want to note that the "I'll guess I'll see you in Europe" exchange, also in Captain America, but Bucky calls Steve babe instead of baby. That's sort of a thing that they have in that. But so now we are moving on to chapter 3, which is from another character's POV. The sun was blazing hot as it beat down on the scrubby field. Peggy Carter stalked the dry patch of dirt in front of the soldiers as they did their push-ups. "Faster, ladies." Okay, 1 minute. Let's stop right there. Should I give Peggy an accent? I was just thinking about this. I don't know if that's a good idea because my English accent is okay. But if I give Peggy an accent, I might be like persuaded to give other characters accents, which will not go as well. So we'll see how it happens. If it comes out, it comes out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. "Faster, ladies. Come on. My grandmother has more life in her, God rest her soul. Move it." "You're not really considering picking Rogers, are you?" Colonel Phillips said quietly behind her. She knew they were looking at the same thing, as Steve Rogers struggled to pick himself up off the ground. His arms were like weak saplings. Actually, his whole body was like an assemblage of twigs. I'm not just considering it, Colonel, Dr. Erskine said defiantly. He is a clear choice. When you brought a 90-pound asthmatic onto my base, I let it slide. I thought, what the hell? Maybe he'd be useful to you, like a gerbil or something. Just as the colonel finished his sentence, Rogers collapsed on the ground, heaving. Never thought you'd actually pick him. Peggy yelled at them again. Come on, girls! Rogers managed to pick himself back up and start again, his little body shaking more than before. She could hear him pushing himself to keep going. She shook her head. He'd been doing that all day. Look at that. He's making me cry. Oh, Colonel Phillips. I'm looking for qualities beyond the physical, Erskine declared. I'm sorry, I just thought about that line that Michael Caine says in The Prestige, I think, but I only know about it from Game Grumps, so I thought about fucking Aaron Hansen doing his impression of Michael Caine saying, you've got to look beyond the physical. Jesus Christ. Anyway, moving on. Do you know how long it took to set up this project? Of all the groveling I had to do in front of Senator What's-His-Name's committee? Yes, I am well aware of your efforts. Then throw me a bone, Phillips sighed out. Hodge passed every test we gave him. He's big, he's fast, he obeys orders, he's a soldier. Peggy looked over at the boy he meant. Big, just like he'd said, strong, and he executed jumping jacks like they were an art form. She couldn't hear a thing from him, though. She chalked it up to concentration. So just to note that line, it used to bother me a lot more. Now I'm just kind of like, whatever, it's dumb. But the implication there is that he's stupid, so he's got no thoughts. Ooh. Which is kind of like, haha, edgy, funny, but... like, again, it doesn't bother me as much because it's just so dumb that I don't care. I can't have it in me to care. But when I reread this, I think for the first fanfic live tweet, I was like, oh my god, this is so, like, terrible. I can't believe this. But anyway, he's a bully, Erskine said back. Peggy didn't know whether she agreed, but she raised an eyebrow and stepped back when she heard Philip's next move. You don't win wars with niceness, Doctor, he said as he pulled the grenade pin. You win wars with guts. Grenade! All of the boys went running from where the dummy landed on the ground, save for Rogers, who dove on top of it and curled up. Get away, he yelled at them. Get back! After a few moments, he lifted his head. Is this a test? Peggy heard a burst of, oh my gods, and did he really? And I can't believe this from Phillips. It seemed Dr. Erskine was right. He's still skinny, Phillips mumbled, rolling his eyes. All right, boys, I think that's enough excitement for today. Whichever of you can get the flag from the pole gets the ride back to the base with the lovely Agent Carter. Everyone else runs behind the truck. Peggy tried not to roll her eyes and tuned out the boys as they all scrambled toward the pole. Gotta motivate 'em somehow, Phillips said as he moved past her. Of course, she said with a tight smile. None of them were going to be able to get it down anyway. They never did. Rogers seemed to realize this as well because he hadn't even tried. Peggy started back toward the Jeep and was climbing inside when there was a metallic crash behind them. When she turned back, the flagpole was lying on the ground and Rogers had folded up the flag and handed it to the colonel. He never said how to get the flag, she heard, and she couldn't help but smile. And that's the end of that, and also the end of this draft. For some reason, I'm surprised. I thought there was a version of Chapter 4, which is the current Chapter 1 of the prose version of Keep Breathing. But there isn't. So anyway, so that's done. That wasn't terrible. My expectations were so low for this because I remembered that other time I read through this and I was like, it's so dry, but I got through that. It was easy, like Sunday morning. There wasn't much to it. I definitely think it could be better. It's not the best thing I've ever read, but it was so easy to read that I don't know, man. Maybe I was tired. Sometimes when I'm tired, it's hard for me to read things. But anyway, that wasn't terrible. One thing I will say is that it does feel like there is a lot of stuff in here that doesn't need to be in here. But I feel like that's something we won't be able to talk about effectively until we get to the second batch of Keep Breathing drafts and talk about the actual version that got published in Coven Phase 1. But yeah, like that Peggy chapter, I know that we have to show like Steve's determination and stuff, but chapter 2 showed that off just fine. We didn't need the Peggy chapter. Number 2, it didn't do anything for Peggy's character to introduce her in that chapter, so what will we lose, you know? But anyway, like I said, we'll talk about that more in depth a little bit further down the line when we read Coven Phase 1. So, last thing that we're doing in this episode, and I know this episode's short, but we have an actual like one-piece story after this, is we are going to read the first draft of The Hulk. So part 2, The Hulk, which is based off of The Hulk. There are 2 chapters of this, I think, so let's get to it. What are you telling me, Betty? She could feel the skepticism pouring off of him in waves, and she hated it because it was making her doubt herself. But she'd refused to let all of the papers littering the floor go to waste, so she pushed his insecurities away as she took a breath. That's 2 sentences. Jesus Christ. What I'm telling you is that I can help you. His brow nodded in confusion. But you've already done the— No, Bruce, I'm saying I can help you, she corrected, placing her palm flat on the binder on her lap. His brown eyes widened. She flipped through the binder and pulled out plastic sheet protectors with old pieces of journal paper inside. The writing on it was fading and completely missing in some parts. She couldn't help but wonder what the book had been through before someone found it. There was so much more than we thought there was, she said as she handed it to him. Is that what I think it is? He asked in awe. How the hell did you manage to get your hands on Erskine's notes? In reality, she'd been through hell and high water to get them, lying both ways to get some alone time in Shield's libraries, then spending hours searching for the damn things with creased pages of detection spells. But here, she just shrugged. I know some people. I thought these were lost. That's what they always say, she deferred. But the thing is that there's no real serum. She put the binder on the floor and slid over to his side. I'm almost certain he passed off the aqua vitae as it, if he had to show it to them at all. The rest of it is pretty basic ritual stuff. Ritual? How could he get away with that? Bruce shook his head. The whole military was on his back about this. No way he would do this in front of them. I know them well, trust me. When it comes to trying to replicate this damn serum, they'll let you do anything you want. Bit of mumbo-jumbo about light exposure or something, and bam, he gets a private room. I don't know how he smuggled in the candles or the powder for the circle. He doesn't say anything about a circle here, I think. He squinted at the worn pages where the text had been rubbed out or faded. She could feel that skepticism creeping back in. There's a lot of stuff missing. I could fill that in. It's not complicated, she reassured him. Erskine seemed not to have a penchant for symbols. Everything had been written out, the words crammed onto the page past the margins, but she could still follow it, even past the point where the words trailed off and faded into the frayed bottom of the page. Are you sure? He asked. Positive. He eyed the paper again, and she could feel him getting nervous again. She pushed it back. If they could make this work, it would be huge. And if they couldn't, no one would have to know. Okay, he finally said with a nod. Let's do this. That's the end of that chapter. That was short, but I like that. This is what I meant by more meat. There is a lot of stuff here, and this is on purpose about the emotions. I feel like there's a lot more detail. There's definitely more of the character here to me. I don't have all that much to say because it's fine. This is the first story with some significant typos and missing words, but I honestly can't bring myself to care all that much. Also, there's definitely a sense of not foreboding on this story, but definitely I feel like you guys shouldn't be doing this that I like a lot. But let's move on to the second chapter. How long do you think this will take? He asked her. She looked up from where she was drawing the circle around him with charcoal powder. Not too long, she said nonchalantly. They said Erskine had Rogers done in an afternoon. The warm breeze moved past them silently, enough to play at the loose strands of her hair, but too weak to disturb the circle or her long black skirt. I thought there'd be more pentagrams. She chuckled. No, there's only you. We don't need 5 points. When the 2 points met, she stepped back. If it makes you feel better, there are 5 candles. She'd have to light those next. Careful with that, he teased, and she rolled her eyes as she bent down to light the one above his head. The parts where Erskine had mentioned his arrangements were terribly worn, partially erased by a water stain, so she filled in the blanks with the basics for fortifying. 5 candles, he had said, and at least 2 of them were red, which made sense, and 1 was gold. She didn't know what that was for, but she didn't dare change it. She made the last 2 gray, just to be safe. There was no mention of the circle, but she didn't find a mention of a triangle or anything else either, so she had to assume. She'd strained her eyes to read the recipe for his aqua vitae. It was less water and more black paste with the consistency of mud, which was strange, and Bruce had said it didn't have much of a taste, which was stranger. Yeah, the red flags are just boo, boo. It's like everything's weird. She's having to fill in the blanks, quote unquote, on a magical ritual, which really, not to get into actual theory about this kind of stuff in real life, but essentially, if you know even a little bit about real life witchcraft, you might know about what substitutions are, and it's basically the belief that in a spell you can take one ingredient out and put in another one. Now, whether or not this actually works depends on who you're talking to. to and how they believe magic works, or how their magic works, basically. Because some people think that substitutions are a thing and you can just do that. So you may have heard like white quartz can sub in for almost any other crystal, or like rosemary, I think, is one of the herbs that you can use to replace another herb. But there are other people, which I am more in the group of, who believe that substitutions aren't really a thing. If you put something different in a spell, you change the spell. Now, whether that changes for the worse or not will depend, so you might as well try it. Because, like, if you sub out your, like, say you have a spell with, like, tourmaline and you sub it in with another mineral, but it has similar attributes or something like that, it could work anyway, or it might not. You don't know. But essentially, what she's doing here is basically substituting things for other things, but without knowing what you're substituting, that's very dangerous. So, anyway, let's move on. She lit the last candle, the black one right in front of her. Okay, honey, try not to move. The paper faded off right before he said who to call on, but she had a pretty good idea who it was. Oh, goodness. Great for us, President below, lend me your ears and hear my plea. All at once, the circle burst into flame. She let out a sigh. At least they were listening tonight. She tilted her head back, raising her hands to the night sky. Forus, bless this man with your many gifts. Give him strength beyond strength and wit beyond wit. Make him strong as an ox, quick as the wind and sly as the fox. Lend him your knowledge and your good judgment. She bowed her head and folded her hands. Numen tum in bon... Oh, God, I don't know how to say that. This is Latin. Nomen tum in bonum benefacis. There we go. There was a moment of silence where a small ache started to form in her left temple, and then the fires extinguished themselves in a small gust of wind. She looked up. Feel any different? She asked him. Bruce's eyes snapped open. I'm sweating more than I was before. He sat up slowly, blinking like he was seeing the sun for the first time. Jesus, I feel like I've been asleep for ages. Look for any symbols or seals on you, she told him. Forrest likes pentagrams, your favorite. She moved forward to retrieve the candles, but when she touched the first one, pain seared through her fingers. What happened? She looked at her hand, and an angry red welt was forming across it. I don't know. She looked at him again. Did you find anything? No. He inspected himself again, patting down his bare chest and lifting the legs of his pants. Not a thing. That's strange, she trailed off, but inside her nerves were building. Could she have done something wrong? She knew Forrest's rituals back and forth. She'd asked for willpower on his behalf more times than she could count. How could that be? Had they overstepped their boundaries? Asked too much? Her sore knuckles were saying yes, but she wasn't sure. All right. Number one, I just want you guys to know, this forest thing is not a real, like, witchcraft ritual. I made it up. To be honest, it's funny looking at it from where I'm standing now, because I don't want to say that I don't do it, but I don't do it. I dabbled in witchcraft for a while, and I've sort of like moved away from it, but I still look at the stuff from time to time. I do more divination and stuff now when I can motivate myself to actually do it. But the stuff that she's doing, while some of it makes sense, there's other stuff that's kind of like, is that really how you would do it? Like, she's like, oh, there's 5 people, so we don't need 5 points in the circle, or we don't need a 5-pointed star or anything. And this is something that carried over into later versions of stories from the Coven universe as well. We'll see it in Coven Avengers, which we'll read in the 2015 batch of stuff. And I've never heard of that actually being a thing. So I basically was pulling shit out of my ass based off of American Horror Story. Hence why she's using charcoal outside instead of like eggshells or something like that. Though I don't know if you can't not use charcoal outside because it's just burnt twigs. So maybe. Also, I'm not sure if the candle colors actually... You know what? Let's not get it. See, this is what happens. But yeah, again, the red flags, just, it's not even a red flag anymore now. It's just like a flashing red light, like, stop. So, moving on. We might have made him mad, she informed him warily. Bruce straightened. What? How? We're not going to get sucked into hell or anything, are we? God. No, but I might have to run back to the house for a few purple candles. If I do, don't move, she instructed, rubbing her hand. It burns like hell. Oh, God, stop saying hell. This is such a bad... Why did they call it a demon? Why? She waited another moment and then resurveyed the situation. Bruce didn't find a thing that wasn't there before, and she didn't feel anything except that dull pain at her temple. She couldn't figure out if that meant anything. She reached for the candle again, a lot slower this time. When she gripped her hand around it, nothing happened. Just when she grabbed it. We're fine, she laughed out. You're fine. He smiled at her, but then pain shot through his face. Well, what is it? She asked frantically. What? She fell back when the pain in her head stung. A numbing buzz was building up like radio static. Bruce? She called out weakly. I can't feel you anymore. She tried to push through the fuzz, to feel whatever he was going through, but all she found was more static. Bruce, you have to... I found it, he panted out. She looked up and found him on his knees, his whole body heaving with his breaths. I found your pentagram. The thing was right there on his chest, carved into it and dripping with black, upside down. Oh, Lord. Good Lord. It's not supposed to be like that, she said in a detached tone. He responded by letting out an agonizing groan and collapsing on the ground. Bruce! She tried to go to his side, but his head popped up and he growled at her. His eyes had gone black, and she froze in fear. Don't! He barked. His body contorted as he was racked with pain, and then he coughed out. Go! I'm not leaving you! Go! He roared, and she got to her feet and raced toward the trees. She ran like she was being chased, and for all she knew, she was. The night closed in on her quickly, and the thick summer air swallowed her whole. What was happening to him? She wanted to go back for him, but she didn't know if that was safe. She could still hear him back there, and she didn't even want to think of what was happening to him. Temptation got the best of her, though, and she looked back before she hit the tree line. All she could do was scream. And that's the end of that. Oh my god. Okay, number 1, that was really good. Number 2, what the fuck? So yeah, demons. The Hulk was a he was possessed by a demon. Like, what happened? I mean, that's the point. We don't really understand it, but like, what? Jesus. So yeah, like I said, that was actually pretty good. It had some issues. The prose started to hew a little bit, Dark Knight trilogy to me, and I was like, oh no. But it wasn't terrible. Again, very readable. The style felt very different from the original stuff that we read, the Captain America stuff. But it wasn't bad. Definitely has an interesting story going on there. I just wanted to note, like, how different this is from something you would see in Coven nowadays. Like, number 1, I decided a few years ago that I wasn't going to include any, like, ritual magic or anything in Coven. Because as the years went on, the tone, I guess, of Coven started to change. And it was less about, like, because when this universe started out being inspired by American Horror Story Season 3, the one with all the witches in it. So as you'll see, when we get to the first draft of Thor next episode, there is a lot of focus on family connections and the actual idea of covens. Over time, I started to drop that, and the family relations like slowly faded away. They clung on to at least 2015 though, but that started to fade away. And the aim of Coven was more about creating an atmosphere of mystery surrounding some of the stuff that happened in it. So that's why ritual magic kind of went out of the window. After the first draft of like Coven Avengers, I decided that that was a thing that not everyone actually did. So a thing like this where a person does a legit like ritual and then another person sort of like pops up and gets possessed by a demon would never happen in Keep Breathing nowadays. Or not in Keep Breathing, but in Coven nowadays. And it wouldn't happen like this if it did, you know? Like, sure, we might have a story where someone gets possessed by a demon. That's not foreshadowing. I'm just saying it could happen. But it would not be like he wakes up and there's a pentagram on his chest and he's like, girl, and she runs away. And now that's how the Hulk happened. Like, that would never happen. So it's just interesting to see like how different all of this stuff is from what exists now. But yeah, so that's the episode. Next episode, we will be reading the first draft of Thor and then the second draft of the Hulk stuff. So I will see you for that. If you like this episode, like it on the YouTubes and subscribe to the channel. You can catch up on old series that we've done. We're starting to get a little ways in, so I have quite a few series behind me now, like at least 6 or something like that. So you can watch or listen to all of those as well as anything else that's on my channel. And I will see you next episode for part 2 of this. Bye!